How I Made Showtime. Hello, my name is Desmond Lynch. I'm 26 years old and I'm a filmmaker. I made a short film called Showtime and I would like to tell you about it. This is the first episode of an audio commentary series on the production of Showtime. In this episode, I will talk about the development, pre-production, production, and post-production of the short film. In the next few episodes, I will be interviewing members of the cast and crew on their respective roles and their experiences with the production. Without further ado, let's begin. The project. Showtime is a dark comedy drama short film that was written and directed by myself, Desmond Lynch. It's about this young woman named Camilla who arrives home late at night from her hospitality job. As soon as she gets to the door of her flat, she witnesses several police cars pull up outside of her neighbor's house. Camilla goes inside, grabs a beer, and watches with glee as the police then raid her neighbor's home. At this point, Camilla starts talking directly to the camera, describing what she is seeing, informing the audience that the house in question was actually a brothel, and then talks about her opinion on the situation and life in general. As the cops drive away, Camilla runs into her quote-unquote flatmate, Kenny, a spice addict that just stays in their home. Kenny is in a bad state and it leaves Camilla somewhat disturbed. At this point, she unravels her morbid, bleak opinion of the world to the audience before heading to bed and telling the audience to, quote-unquote, go home. The story takes place in and around this one house in Belfast. The tone and style of the film is like a mix between Fleabag and Trainspotting. It's a narrative story that acts as a slice-of-life monologue, reflecting the anxieties of the working-class young people in the modern age. Development. I remember years ago I used to work in a bar with this young woman who was very much like Camilla. She once told me this story of her time living in the Holy Lands, an area of Belfast which can be a bit dodgy at times. She told me a story of how one time she got home from work late at night. She witnessed some cop cars pull up on her neighbor's house across the street. She went inside her home and watched the house raid from her window, sipping a Copperberg. The house in question was a brothel that was being raided. That story always stuck with me. I found it really fun and engaging, and I thought it would make a great opening for a feature film that I'd like to make someday. I wasn't really in a position to make a feature film at the time, so I thought about that story and making it into a short film instead. It was something very simple that could be shot on a low budget and only required one location. So with that in mind, I began writing. The character of Camilla was based on a few different women I've met, mainly working class young women from Belfast. While the story of the house raid is based off of one individual, the characters themselves are based on various different people I've met alongside my own personal anxieties at the time, namely that of living in a world where you don't own anything, you have no agency or social mobility, as well as the other anxieties of climate, politics, finances, stuff like that, all piled together can make you feel like the world is about to collapse in on itself. Camilla reflects this doomer outlook on life that a lot of young people have. I wanted Camilla to be this type of person where you like her even though you don't necessarily like the things she says. She's one of those people with no filter and doesn't really care if what she says is vulgar or offensive. I also wanted her to be like an outlet for my own personal anxieties and the anxieties of a lot of people my age who worry about the future, their job, their standard of living, and how long all of this can really last. I approached the project the same way that Paul Schrader approached Taxi Driver. He wrote Travis Bickle so that he wouldn't become like Travis Bickle. In the same way, I wrote Camilla so that I could excommunicate these feelings of doom and gloom from my own life. The character of Kenny was based on a few people I've known throughout my life. It's a reflection of addiction and how that impacts families and the people that live around addiction as well. It also reflects the grim reality of drug dealing, in which Camilla and her boyfriend pity Kenny, but still sell him drugs just because they want his money. So you have these characters, one working class and one middle class, who are living in this very dodgy area of Belfast where there's a criminal element and a lot of poor people struggling to get by. There's this isolation that Camilla brings to herself where she can't really connect to anyone around her because of her various issues and her worldview as a whole. There was a number of challenges to the script. I always intended for Camilla to talk to the camera. On one end, it made the story simpler to tell. There was no concerns of hiring more actors to interact with, and it made it easier to tell the story with minimal action and minimal locations. The police cars and the raid itself happens off screen. All of that was intended to be portrayed via sound design alongside some lighting setups. There's not really a plot to the story, nothing really happens, it's just a slice of life fourth wall breaking monologue in which the main character talks about what she's seen, what she does, her perspective on the world, etc. I did have some concerns that it might not be enough plot wise, but I couldn't really think of anything that could happen in the story that would stay true to what I wanted from the outset. I approached this as more of a character study and an outlet for my own personal anxieties. There is some dark humor and dramatic elements added in throughout as well. I believe I wrote about 3 drafts of the script, making some changes like adding the Kenny character, adjusting the dialogue, nothing too major. After the 3rd draft, that was the script locked, and I then went about making the short. Pre-production. Casting was the big focus at the time. If I couldn't find the right person to play Camilla, I just wasn't going to make the film. I needed an actress with a playing age of 18 to 25, as that was in and around the age of the character as well as the various women that she was based off of. So for this project, I approached different actors agencies, theatre groups, and some drama schools all across the country. I think there's about 30 to 40 women who auditioned for the role. I was very specific about someone who had the right tone, vibe, look, someone who could pull off the accent as well. It was really vital I hired someone who understood the character. I ended up going with Anya Collier. She was recommended by her drama school and was one of the first people to send me their self-tapes. I only ever received self-tapes. Unlike my audio drama series, The Witch in the Orchard, I didn't host any in-person or Zoom auditions, mainly because I didn't like that process, and I found the self-tape process more manageable. I didn't do any auditions for the role of Kenny. I always intended to cast Sean McConville. I worked with Sean previously on his comedy sketches, as well as his Pastor Ed web series. I thought he could do really well in this role, and I thought that because he had a South Belfast accent that he would sound a bit posher than Anya's character. In the final stages of the audition process, I had a joint Zoom call with both Anya and Sean. We played the scene in the kitchen. Each time I gave Anya some different direction. We started off with approach Kenny like you feel sorry for him. Then I said, now approach him like you're making fun of him. And then, now approach him like you don't care and are bored. I gave them these different adjustments to the performance just to see how well she responded to following direction. I think that's an important way to find out if you can work well with an actor, and I recommend a director does that before they consider casting that person. Anya and Sean worked well together, so that was the cast locked in. I would have regular rehearsals via Zoom with Anya to lock down the performance. To help me get on the same level, I started memorizing the lines and scene direction, and even approaching it from the perspective of a performer. It's a different vibe when you read something versus when you actually say it, so it's good to see how many different kinds of ways you could say the words as they're written on the page. It was important to get that right because the entire thing is basically a one-man show, so a lot was carried in this continuous performance. To help with stuff like getting into character, I sent Anya a list of films to watch like Alfie, Trainspotting, as well as stuff like Fleabag because it was a big influence on the fourth wall nature of the story. I also arranged meetings via Zoom with people from Belfast so that Anya could talk to them and get a vibe for the city and learn how to do the accent. I also arranged for meetings via Zoom with people from Belfast so that Anya could talk to them, get a vibe for the city, and learn how to do the accent. With Sean, I didn't have to do too much work because he is a Belfast native and his role was relatively small in comparison to Anya. I had one phone call with him to discuss the character, and I also sent him an article explaining spice and how it affects people. For the background voice actors during the raid, I had my friends Rebecca and Jeremy supply their voice talents to the project. Jeremy voiced some of the police officers and the pimp, while Rebecca voiced some of the police officers and the prostitutes. We recorded each line in various different tones and accents. We spent about an hour or two gathering all the voices, and those voices will be used in the final edit. With the cast sorted, I had other matters to sort out, as your production is only as efficient as your pre-production. I drew up storyboards detailing all the different kinds of shots I wanted. It's just one person talking for most of it, so one shot can be a bit stagnant in the edit. I wanted multiple different shots from different angles to make the piece more interesting. Getting crew was relatively easy for me since I often work as a sound recordist for local film productions, so that in turn allowed me to pull in favors from friends and people I had worked with previously. Olivia Beatty was the producer for this. She helped take some of the workload off of me and got stuff like the schedule, food orders, call sheets, and other stuff sorted. Olivia was previously the second assistant director for the Unholy Lands movie, so it was good to work with her again. Lucy Reed was the art director for this project. I had worked with her previously on a few projects. She was good at sourcing things like props and set decoration for cheap. She was also able to help source some costume stuff since we couldn't afford to bring on a costume person. It's not her department, but she helped out anyway, which I appreciate. Anya also wore some of her own clothes and did her own hair and makeup, which helped save money. For Lucy, I drew up some reference documents for what I wanted in regards to the art design. I also shared with her the cinematography references and the storyboards so that she could understand how the lighting for each scene would look, as well as what will and will not be caught on camera. Lucy was able to bring her ideas to the project, like adding wallpaper to the corridor in the final scene, adding fake mold in the corners of the kitchen, changing the curtains by the window, etc. It's really impressive what she was able to accomplish all by herself. Thomas alone was the cinematographer / director of photography, which is basically a fancy word for a cameraman. I'd worked with Tom on 2 features in the past that I did sound for, and I brought him on to do this. Tom was able to provide his own camera as well as backup camera in case there was any technical issues. We ended up just pulling in favors to help get lighting equipment for the project. Tom was studying in the NFTS for most of pre-production, so I worked a lot with Patrick Callahan, the camera assistant, to help plan out some of the logistics. Patrick helped shoot a test film in which we shot many of the different types of shots we would use in the film. I also drew up some cinematography references to show how I wanted each scene to be lit. Mainly I wanted a lot of yellows, reds, and shadows. It would have a stylish grit to it. I did some lighting tests and filmed it to show Tom what I was looking for. As soon as Tom was back from London, he and Patrick scouted the location again. We ran through what we were shooting, if there was going to be any problems we would face, and how they would light the entire film. One of the main concerns was shooting darkness in a way where none of it would be distorted and you could see what was on screen. Tom insisted on using as many in-camera lights as possible, meaning stuff like lamps had to be sourced by Lucy as well. We opted to go handheld for the entire shoot. There's no money for rigs, and handheld meant there would be a faster turnaround. It allowed us to move around easier as well. We used prime lenses, namely a 25mm lens and a 15mm lens. I originally wanted a 35mm as I felt that looked more natural to what the eyes see, but Tom convinced me to use the 25, stating that the small space meant that the 25 would be more beneficial. File size and backups were a big concern for the production. We were shooting 6K footage, so it was vital we had plenty of portable hard drives for backups, and that myself, Tom, and the editor would have their own backups for safety. Sound was a big concern as well for pre-production. I planned out the storyboards and the script to be sound friendly. Almost all of the dialogue takes place indoors. All the shots are framed in such a way where a boom mic can get in pretty close, stuff like that. I brought on Matteo DiCugno as the location sound mixer for the production and Mercer Hughes as the boom operator. I had worked with Matteo before on a TV pilot, and I had worked with Mercer on a few skits with Sean. It's good to have a boom op for production, as it can be difficult at times for a one-man sound team to manage everything, including setting up sound gear, adjusting lav mics, and then being the boom op on top of that. If you can afford it, I'd always recommend bringing on an additional person to the sound team. I shared the storyboard, shot list, and other things with Matteo, as well as invited him to the location scout. We were filming the entire shoot in my flat on Dunluce Avenue, and from experience I knew my neighbours could be quite loud on Sunday nights, so we shot all the interiors on a Saturday night and the exteriors on the Sunday. Changing a date meant that we saved ourselves some hassle with cleaning up sound in post. Matteo raised his concerns and I addressed them accordingly. I put him in contact with different departments so they could talk about any concerns they'd have and come to conclusions on how to fix them. Stuff like that ensured we had a more efficient production. We also reached out to the cast and crew beforehand to find out any information in regards to allergies, food preferences, and other requirements like that. That in turn ensured we didn't have any incidents on set. Olivia, when she drew up the call sheets, made sure to include information about local hospitals, and I completed the required risk assessments for the insurance. The day before the shoot, I invited the cast and crew to the location we were using, which was my flat on Dunluce Avenue. I ran some rehearsals with Anya and Sean, Thomas ran some lighting tests, Matteo ran some sound tests, and Lucy began setting up the art decoration for the various locations in the house. With all that sorted, we were ready to go. Production. I would admit I was quite nervous with the production aspect of things, as it was my first proper short film that I had ever made outside of an educational environment, so it was important for me that I did a good job. On day one, we were shooting in late afternoon as it was getting dark. Before the call time, myself and Anya would run extensive rehearsals of the scenes we were shooting that day. I would have a DSLR camera and I would hold it to my face. I would watch her performance through the viewfinder of the camera while Anya would give her performance to the lens. It gave her an idea of what it would be like performing directly to a camera. The main concern was that we got good sound. The entire film is mostly dialogue and it is dependent on sound design to tell the story. So it was vital we got good sound for the edit. Thankfully, we'd done a lot of work in pre-production to ensure any issues we may face were easily solved. We got pretty much all the sound we'd want for the film during production, as well as most of the shots I had in storyboards. It's a very small area. We were filming in the kitchen for the Kenny Camilla scenes, some parts of the living room, and then the window in front of the ground floor bedroom, then the hallway as well. On day one, we shot the kitchen stuff first. We basically wanted to wrap Sean immediately. As a general rule, you don't want anyone on set who doesn't have to be there. So if we shot all of Sean's stuff first, that meant he wouldn't need to be hanging around all day. The lighting setup for the kitchen took longer than anticipated. There was some issues with the fire exit emergency lights because they could not be turned off and thus meant that there was a light in the room that the DOP could not control. We ended up adopting this light as a key light to the setup and it's present in a few shots. Lighting set us back more than anticipated. The main issue was that because of the budget, we could only afford to have a 2-man camera crew. If you have less people on your camera crew, setups and turnarounds take longer. After this, we finished some shots in the living room, again a new lighting setup alongside some extra art design prep as well. After this, we moved on to the bedroom/window scenes. Because of the build of the flat, there was no window in the living room or the kitchen that faced out into the main street, so we had to cheat the shot in such a way that the bedroom window was an extension of the living room. To do this, we moved out the bed from the spare bedroom, then moved in one of the chairs from the living room into the bedroom so that it looked like the living room. Lucy changed out the curtains for something that looked dirtier and less like bedroom curtains. We used a lot of practical lights to help light the scene, such as lamps, as well as a fill light out the window to amplify the orange hue to the street lights, plus an RGB light to mimic the flashing red and blue lights of a cop car. I had Patrick, the camera assistant, stand outside to guard the lights. He also played a vital role in turning the RGB light away from the direction of the cast to mimic the cop cars driving off. Because he was outside, that meant that cueing him would be difficult. We couldn't open a window because that would cause a noise problem, and we couldn't call him on a mobile due to the same reason. So timings will be a big issue. What we ended up doing was this. Mateo, the sound mixer, had provided me with some in-ear monitors, which is this receiver that plays all the audio being recorded live to the listener, so they can listen to the scene how the microphones are picking it up. So I gave the IAM to Patrick. I told him to put the headphones on. Then I told Mateo that when Anya says a certain line, to press the slate mic on his recorder and say "now" to cue Patrick. We did one rehearsal to get the lighting cue right. As soon as we all knew the cues, we gathered all the shots we could. I wanted a variety of shots for this main scene, including a medium close-up, a mid-shot, and a close-up, just so we had variety for the edit. The most challenging shot for us was where it starts on a wide of Anya by the window, then she walks into a medium close-up. The camera is on the other side of the room, and we had a lot of issues trying to figure out a position for the camera and the boom mic without getting any of us in reflections of the window. That took some time to figure out, but we managed to get it done. That slight hiccup made us run over schedule, but we got almost all I wanted. We ended up dropping a few shots for time reasons. The second day was a lot more challenging. We started off shooting the final scene, which was this dynamic master shot. I'd spent the morning doing rehearsals with Anya and sorting out the blocking to help make the shot look more interesting. Crew call was earlier that day, so the sun was still up. Windows had to be blacked out, and there was a similar lighting problem in the hallway that we faced in the kitchen with the fire exit light. We ended up blocking out that light with bin bags. We had one central key light at the top of the stairs, followed by some fill near the end of the stairway, plus some practical lights like a lamp in one of the rooms. It looks stylish, but still realistic, like those lights are coming from plausible light sources within the story. This was a challenging shot to get right because it was a master that had a lot of movement, so it was quite technical and it was quite intense performance-wise as well. We ended up doing about 14 takes total of this one shot, which is a lot, especially when you compare it to the other takes where we'd average 2 to 5 takes at most. But this was the ending of the movie, so it was important we got it right. After we finished this scene, we broke for lunch and then moved on to exteriors. While we shot the exteriors, Lucy would take down and remove any art decoration from the hallway. She did a similar thing to the kitchen and living room while we were shooting the bedroom stuff the day before. So long as they don't cause any sound issues, it's perfectly fine for crew like the art department to work on cleanup while the other crew members are shooting. It saves a lot of time at the end, especially during a wrap when everyone is keen to get home. The exteriors for me were one of the more stressful aspects of the production. It's a very low budget film, so there's no location people and there's no permits to close down the road or anything like that, so we had to embrace this guerrilla filmmaking purely out of necessity. Due to the nature of the road on Dunluce Avenue, it was just a nightmare to deal with. It's a one-way street and the pavement was too narrow to film on due to there being so many parked cars, so we had to be on the road. It was unusually busy for a Sunday evening, so we'd have to cut takes early to get off the road to let cars past. So we're dealing with that alongside some disruptions from the general public as well. Thankfully, most of the exteriors were relatively easy to shoot. We're talking about 5 or so shots, all with handheld, so it was a quick turnaround for each shot. There is only one line of dialogue, so sound-wise it wasn't too intense. We got the line clean and the sound team managed to gather some production sounds such as footsteps and other things like that as well, so we had variety for the edit. It took a couple of hours and I got a little stressed out, but we managed to gather what I needed. And we ended up wrapping early that day as well. As soon as we wrap on both days, Tom and Mateo made sure to transfer over camera footage as well as sound files. We then backed them up on our respective portable hard drives. I made sure to buy some portable hard drives during pre-production. For this production, I only needed a 2TB portable hard drive. I had a few backups, Mateo and Tom had their own. I also made sure Mercer had his own backups as well since he was editing the project. Once all of that was finished, we put away our equipment and that was production finished. Post-production. The post-production process was quite complicated. While we were filming and recording sound on very high standard industry grade equipment like the Red Komodo and the Zaxcom Nomad, editing wise we were a bit more restricted. We ended up using Premiere Pro and DaVinci Resolve for the video edit and then Adobe Audition for the sound edit. We shot the footage at 6K. We couldn't edit on these video files because it would cause the editing timeline to lag, so to compensate we made proxies. The proxies took some time to make. Mercer, the editor, handled the proxies and sent me them whenever they were finished. So I only ever got a chance to see the rushes about a week or two after we wrapped production. I watched all the rushes, decided what takes I liked and what takes I didn't like. I then had a chat with Mercer about the edit. What we did was this. I let Mercer edit together his own version of the film, and I edited together my own version of the film as well. We then swapped and compared edits. We were on the same page for a lot of things, but there were some notable difference in pacing, how we cut shots together, what takes we used, etc. We ended up having some discussions about each other's work, and then combined the best elements of both versions of the film into future edits. Mercer's contribution largely resulted in some takes being swapped out for more interesting versions. Like for example, when Camilla enters the kitchen to talk to Kenny, I originally used a wider angle, but Mercer convinced me to use the 15mm shot of her entering the room as it looked more intentional. My contribution largely resonated with the scene by the window. Mercer's cut used less of the coverage I gathered. I wanted more coverage added and insisted that we cut on movement. Even the smallest movement, as it felt more natural. The cuts were less notable. It also added to the energy of the scene, which was needed because she's just sitting by a window and talking, so visually it could get a bit boring very quickly. So having those edits helped keep the energy of the scene that I wanted. My big focus was cutting on movement and the use of sound in the edit. I made sure in my notes to Mercer to make sure I explained my decisions, where the music and sound beats were going so that he understood why I was asking him to edit the film in a certain way. In my notes, I explained what I wanted and why I wanted it, so that he better understood my decision making. That part is vital just so they understand where I'm coming from, but also if they have any input, they could suggest a better way of doing things because they know what I'm going for. So you want to ensure that you always have a clear stream of communication and that you're always on the same page about what the project is about. The edit took a while. I think we went through something like 3 or 4 drafts of the video edit before we called picture lock. As soon as we were finished with the video edit, we then moved on to the sound edit. There was 2 parts of the sound edit. There was the assembly of the sound edit, and then there was the final sound mixing. I would handle the assembly of the sound edit, and Justinus would cover the final sound mixing. The assembly of the sound edit mainly focused on deciding what sound effects we would use, what music we would use, ambience, atmos, as well as dialogue. The sound mixing at the end was mainly to ensure that the levels of the sound edit were balanced for the different arenas in which the film could be watched, such as cinema, TV, laptop, and phone. For the sound edit, Justina supplied some dialogue sound files that had been cleaned. Thankfully, the production sound was such a high quality that Justinus had a very easy time cleaning the sound. After I received the sound, I synced it up to my sound edit. Almost the entirety of the dialogue was clean and usable. There was one line in which the boom audio was distorted, so we had to use Anya's lav, but unless you had a very selective ear, you won't notice it. I opted to use the boom audio for almost all of the dialogue and production sound. The boom in general sounds better. It gives you a better tone of the room in respects to dialogue and production sound effects. I find that while lavs are good at picking up dialogue, the boom really picks up the performance. I only ever used the lavs whenever I had to, for example during coverage where the boom mic is focused on the actor on screen and not on the actor that we cannot see. I would use the lav audio for the actor we don't see. I would also use the lav audio to pick up certain production sound. For example, in the hallway scene, whenever Camilla tears off the wallpaper and rips it apart, I used the lav audio for this production sound because the lav mic was closer to the sound source and it sounded better or more visceral than what the boom mic had gathered. Sound design was a big driving part to the story. Due to the budget of the production, we couldn't show the actual police raid, so all of that had to be portrayed via sound design. For the raid itself, I had planned that out ahead of time, both in the script and in some previous demo edits. I had made these demo edits of the sound design for the raid during pre-production, basically like an audio skit of the raid. You can listen here.
Please, open up. Open up. This is your last warning.
No response. I'm going in.
1, 3. 1, 2, 3. Please get on the drive. Get on the drive. Please drop it. On the drive. No. What's going on? Get the cuffs. Get the cuffs. Get off me, bastard. You're under arrest for prostitution, human trafficking, loitering, evading arrest.
Do you know who I am? I will kill you for this. I kill you.
Whatever you do say will be held against you in court.
Please.
Out.
Right. No. Get out. Please.
Final warning.
Don't do this.
Out.
Please.
What did I do?
Get in the car.
What did I do? Get in the car.
Fuck you. Right, that's it.
Please, I have kids to feed.
Hands to yourself, mister. Where will we go? Where will we go?
I'd get a hotel, love.
Babies.
I love you.
I edited that demo with music and sound effects, mostly to show off to my friends who did the voice acting, but also to give Anya an idea of what exactly was happening outside, as that helped with the performance. Having made that demo, it meant I knew exactly what sounds to use. It wasn't just some random sounds mushed together. There was narrative purpose, there was cause and effect, and that really helped the edit come along and help keep the story alive. The main difficulty of the sound edit was finding the right balance between dialogue levels and the rest of the sound design. It was important to me that the dialogue be crisp and clear. I didn't want anyone to have to put on subtitles to understand what the actors were saying. Thankfully, the cast were able to say their lines perfectly clearly, so that was easy to amplify. The sound effects and atmos had to be adjusted accordingly. You wanted them loud enough that the audience can hear them clearly and will get the desired emotional reaction from hearing those sound effects, but you don't want them so loud that you cannot hear the dialogue. That was a very delicate balance to achieve, especially considering the signs we needed to use to convey the rage, such as large thuds, police sirens, doors being broken down, screaming, cars passing by. All that chaos had to be toned down just so the audience could hear the dialogue. I can't emphasize how important it was for the audience to understand the dialogue, especially since it was a dialogue-heavy film, and that dialogue described the house raid that was occurring off-screen. You have to be very selective with the sound effects that you use. You need to use sound effects that are clear and precise. They should be easy to distinguish. They should fit the tone of the film. The audience should understand what they are or what they represent. And above all else, they should feel right. A large part of my decision making in regards to what sound effects to use relies solely on gut feeling. The sound design for Showtime was complex but not complicated, meaning that I wanted a sound design that was very layered and interesting. You could watch the film several times and pick up different sounds you may have missed on the first viewing. For example, there's a shot when Camilla is looking out the window and a random car goes past. I felt that it would be strange, narratively speaking, if the car was just to simply go past, because in the story there was supposed to be a lot of cop cars on the road. So to fix that, I added sounds for the car going past, namely the car engine, the car horn, and then the sound of a man, the driver, saying yo as a term of mockery for those getting arrested. Doing that made the car feel intentional rather than a background error, and adding all of that into the soundscape made it more layered as well. I didn't want the soundscape to be complicated, meaning that I didn't want the sound design to confuse the audience or take them out of the immersion. That meant that if a sound effect made a line of dialogue more difficult to hear, I had to take it out. It also meant that if the sound effect didn't sound clear, as in you heard it and you didn't immediately know what the sound was or how it impacted the story, I had to take it out. When I started out, I kept adding and adding as many sound effects as I could, and then slowly but surely starting removing them from the film. In the edit, you want to include things that elevate the piece. You can tell what you need by removing more and more. If you remove something and all of a sudden the piece doesn't work, put it back in. If you remove something and you realize nothing has really changed, keep it out. If you remove something and you realize that the whole piece has suddenly improved, you definitely keep it out. There is no easy way to make those decisions. You simply have to go through as much trial and error as possible, but after a while you get better at editing, and in turn that affects how you write, how you handle pre-production and production as a whole, because you end up shooting only the stuff that you 100% will definitely need. There was plenty to experiment with, especially with the dialogue edit. There is one scene by the window in which I didn't like the specific line delivery of a certain sentence. I couldn't cut it in the video edit because it would have caused problems, so what I did in the sound edit is I removed out one specific sentence in the audio file and then swapped it out for a take on that same line with a different performance. Swapping it out meant that the line delivery felt better, and it also surprisingly matched up perfectly. So you wouldn't even notice that the line was from a different take. I did plenty of stuff like that during the sound edit. I brought on a man called Alex to help compose one song, namely the electro music that you could hear at the start of the movie. That is coming from the house from across the street. I asked for the worst song he could possibly make, and I think we went through about a dozen revisions because the music he kept making just sounded too good, and I wanted something that was objectively terrible and offensive to the ears. Eventually we got pretty close, and that's the song we used in the film. After the sound edit, I handed over the reins to Justinas for the final sound mixing. The job for Justinas was adjusting all the sound in the film so that the levels were safe to play in the cinema, on a TV, on your computer, and on your phone. There was some setbacks because of the limitation to the Adobe Audition software that we were using, meaning on Justinas' end, there was a lot of lag and he couldn't get exactly what he wanted when he wanted it. My organization of the sound edit was also an issue, so Justinas had to spend a lot of time reorganizing the sound edit so that it was a cleaner timeline, stuff like each dialogue file in different locations having their own tracks, as well as certain sound effects having their own tracks as well. Stuff like that. I believe we went through 4 different drafts of the final sound mix before I was satisfied with what we made. My main priority was making sure the final mix sounded as close to my original sound edit as possible, but also making sure it fell into the confines of what was acceptable sound levels that could be played in a cinema as well. So I wanted it to be loud, but not too loud. silence was also a key point of the film. Not just the absence of sound, but finding a really authentic level for the room tone to make it feel more real. We didn't want to create a chamber of silence, but rather just the kind of quiet you can only get at 3 a.m. when no one is awake. That was what we were looking for. Silence helped set the tone, it played into the narrative, and it gave balance to the louder parts of the film. The silence made the chaos seem louder, and that was what I wanted. When the sound mix was finalized, we then finally moved on to the color grade. The color grade was very simple, mainly because I had such detailed conversations with Thomas, the DOP, who was handling the color grade, about the lighting, the cinematography, etc. So there was a lot of references for him to draw upon when making the color grade. I think we only did a few drafts. The biggest issues we faced was whether or not to add a film grade filter to the grade. We shot it on digital, of course, but Thomas is a big fan of film and he wants to shoot everything and edit it to make it look like it was shot on film. We had some back and forth and we eventually decided to use film grade because it made the film look grittier and darker than it would have without it. Once the grade was finished, we had Mercer handle the final exports. We would have had versions of the film with different video qualities ranging from the highest to the lowest, as well as versions with different stereo sound mixes, one mix for digital and one mix for cinema. I think we made about 8 different versions in the end. Once the final exports are finished, that was the film completely wrapped. Conclusion. This was my first proper short film, and to be honest, I'm quite happy with how it turned out. It spent just under 2 years on the festival circuit and received positive reactions from the audiences and the festival organizers. The key lessons I would take away from production of Showtime is this. The first, it would have been a better idea to bring a first assistant director on board just to help take stuff like scheduling off of my shoulders, as that put some stress on me. So not having to worry about that would have been better. The second, it would have been a good idea to bring on board a costume person. That would have taken some pressure off of both Anya and Lucy, who had to supply the costume for Camilla, as well as Sean, who had to supply his own costume as well. Having a costume person on set would have also helped with any continuity errors in relation to the costume. We would have had an easier time with a costume person on board. Thomas and Patrick did a great job, but there's only so much 2 guys can do. If you have an extra person, things get done a lot faster. That said, most of these issues were down to money, and there just wasn't a lot, so we did the best we could. In hindsight, I would have tried to gather more money for the budget just to bring on some more people and also increase the pay for the cast and crew. In regards to directing actors, I was a bit less experienced at this stage. I kind of over-directed them, gave them too much direction, gave them direction that was just unplayable. In hindsight, I think it would have been better if I had given them simpler direction. It would have proved more effective, it would have saved from causing confusion on set as well. If you keep things simple, that means that the actor doesn't get stuck in their own head and they can now focus on being in the moment. I also would have tried to shoot less stuff because a lot of the stuff we never even used in the edit. So we could have saved a lot of time by just cutting shots in pre-production so that we would only focus on getting shots we definitely 100% need for the film. In regards to the sound edit, I would have just been a lot more organized in how I made the timeline, as cleaning up the timeline was what Justina spent a lot of his time doing. So if I had just made a clean and tidy timeline for him to edit the final sound mix, that would have saved us a lot of time in post-production. In the end, I had a mostly positive time making Showtime. I'm pretty well versed in the flaws that I perceive in it, but as it stands, I think it's pretty great, especially for my first proper short film that I directed. I'm very happy with how it turned out in the end. What's next? This is the first part of a behind-the-scenes series that talks about the production and post-production of Showtime. In this series, I will be interviewing various members of the cast and crew, as well as a director's commentary on the film itself. Outside of Showtime, I am pretty busy with making more Witch Chronicles episodes, as well as writing the next big audio drama, The Witch and the Heart of Stone. I'm also editing my recent short film, God's Country, so I hope to finish that off soon. I'm also looking to start development on a feature film that I want to make some point down the line, so I'll be developing that this year as well. Thank you all for listening, and goodbye.